Standing at my husband's graveside, watching rain mix with tears on my 8-year-old son's face, I never expected what happened next. The cemetery was packed with people from our small Tennessee town, all gathered to say goodbye to Roland, the veterinarian who'd treated their pets like family for 12 years. Black umbrellas bloomed across the hillside like dark flowers, and the pastor's voice carried over the sound of falling rain. My mother-in-law, Vera, stood directly across from me, her black veil doing nothing to hide the contempt in her eyes. She'd been staring at me since we arrived, her mouth set in that familiar line of disapproval I'd seen for 13 years. My son Quincy pressed against my side, his small hand gripping mine so tight I could feel his pulse racing through his palm. "We gather here to commit Roland's body to the earth," Pastor Tillman began, but Vera's voice suddenly cut through his words like a blade through silk. "He died because he couldn't handle her failure." Her words rang out clear and sharp, making every head turn. She wasn't even trying to whisper. My brilliant son reduced to nothing because his wife couldn't even manage to get promoted in a small-town library. The shame of it killed him. Gasps rippled through the crowd. My sister Daphne grabbed my elbow, steadying me as my knees threatened to buckle. Chester, my father-in-law, reached for Vera's arm, but she shook him off, her voice rising even louder. "Everyone here knows it. Roland deserved better than a mediocre wife who dragged him down. He told me himself how embarrassed he was when she lost that promotion to someone's nephew. He said the stress was eating him alive." That's when Quincy broke free from my grip. My little boy, who'd been so quiet these past 3 days, suddenly ran forward and grabbed the edge of his father's coffin with both hands. His voice rang out clear and strong, nothing like the whisper I'd expected. "Grandma, should I tell everyone what you made Dad drink?" The pastor's Bible slipped from his hands and hit the mud with a wet thud. 30 relatives fell completely silent. Even the rain seemed to pause. Quincy turned to face Vera, his small hand reaching into his pocket. "Should I show them what Dad gave me to keep safe? Should I tell them about the recordings on his phone where you called Mom a burden? Should I tell them how sick Dad got every Sunday after drinking your special tea?" Vera's face went white behind her veil. "You lying little brat," she hissed, but her voice had lost its earlier confidence. My son pulled out a small glass vial from his pocket, holding it up for everyone to see. The liquid inside caught what little light filtered through the storm clouds. "Dad said if anything happened to him, I should show this to the police. He said you were poisoning him, Grandma. He said you wanted him to leave Mom and me." Chester stumbled backward, his face a mask of horror. "Vera, what is the boy talking about?" The relatives pressed closer, their umbrellas forgotten as rain soaked through their funeral clothes. Mrs. Patterson from the church choir dropped her hymnal. Dr. Morrison, who'd signed Roland's death certificate, pushed through the crowd with his phone already out. "That's enough from this child," Vera snapped, starting toward Quincy. But I found my voice and my strength in the same instant. "Don't you dare touch my son." My voice carried across the cemetery with a force I didn't know I possessed. "Roland left recordings, Vera. 6 months of evidence. 6 months of you bringing him special tea for his stress. 6 months of him getting sicker and sicker. The last recording was 3 days before he died, and he named you specifically." I pulled out Roland's phone from my coat pocket, my hand steady despite the earthquake in my chest. "He recorded everything. Your visits, your criticisms, your insistence that he drink every drop of your special brew, how you told him he was wasting his life with me, how you said he needed to be freed from his burden." The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Someone was already on the phone with the police. Pastor Tillman stood frozen, his Bible still face down in the mud at his feet, rain washing the gold-edged pages brown. Vera's carefully constructed mask of the grieving mother finally cracked completely. "I was trying to save him from mediocrity. That tea was medicinal, meant to clear his mind and give him strength to make the right choice." "What was in the tea, Vera?" Chester's voice broke as he asked the question everyone was thinking, but Quincy answered before she could. "Oleander," he said, his young voice carrying the weight of terrible knowledge. "Dad looked it up. He found the plant in Grandma's greenhouse. He took pictures. It's all on his phone, Mom. He saved everything to protect us. The sirens were already wailing in the distance, growing louder as they approached the cemetery gates. Vera stood there in the rain, her black dress clinging to her frame, her veil now thrown back to reveal a face twisted with rage and something else. The dawning realization that her own grandson had just exposed her as a murderer at her son's funeral. 3 days before that graveside confrontation, I was sitting on the floor of Roland's veterinary clinic, surrounded by cardboard boxes and 12 years of memories. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced above stacks of patient files. Each folder represented a family Roland had helped, a pet he'd saved or comforted in their final moments. My fingers traced his handwriting on a file labeled Miracle, the 3-legged cat he'd nursed back to health and we'd ended up adopting. "Mom, why did Dad get so tired all the time?" Quincy asked from the doorway, holding his father's stethoscope around his neck like Roland used to wear it. "Remember how he used to play catch with me every evening? But these last few months, he could barely walk from the car to the house after work." I looked up at my son, seeing Roland's eyes in his small face, the same gentle brown that could calm any frightened animal. "Sometimes adults get tired, sweetheart. Your dad worked very hard taking care of all those animals." But even as I said it, doubt gnawed at me. Roland had been the healthiest person I knew. He ran 5 miles every morning before work, never smoked, barely drank, and at 36, his last physical showed perfect results. That was 7 months ago, just before Vera started her Sunday tea visits. He kept saying his stomach hurt after visiting Grandma Vera, Quincy continued, walking over to sit beside me. "Last Sunday, he threw up in the parking lot after we left her house. He made me promise not to tell you because he didn't want you to worry." The revelation hit me like cold water. Roland had been protecting me even while he was suffering. Classic Roland, always putting others first. I pulled Quincy close, breathing in the scent of his strawberry shampoo, trying to hold myself together for his sake. My sister Daphne arrived from Memphis that afternoon, her rental car pulling up just as Chester was leaving. He dropped off some of Roland's childhood things that Vera insisted should be returned to me, though I suspected she just wanted them out of her house. Chester looked older than his 65 years, his shoulders slumped with a grief that seemed to go deeper than just losing his son. "How are you holding up, Bethany?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're managing," I replied, though managing felt like too strong a word for the autopilot state I'd been functioning in. "Vera wanted me to remind you that she'll handle the funeral arrangements. She has very specific ideas about how Roland should be remembered." He couldn't meet my eyes as he said it. After he left, Daphne helped me sort through more boxes while Quincy played with Miracle in the next room. "Something feels wrong about all this, Beth," she said, setting aside a stack of veterinary journals. "Roland was healthy as a horse. Hearts don't just stop in healthy 36-year-old men." "The death certificate says cardiac arrest," I replied mechanically, having repeated this information so many times it had lost its meaning. "But what caused it? Did they do an autopsy?" Vera insisted it wasn't necessary. She said it would delay the funeral, and Roland wouldn't have wanted that. Dr. Morrison agreed since Roland had no history of drug use or suspicious circumstances. Daphne frowned, her lawyer instincts clearly triggered. Vera decided, "Beth, you're his wife. That should have been your decision." She was right. But in those first horrible hours after Roland's collapse, I'd been too shocked to fight Vera on anything. She'd swooped in like a general commanding troops, making decisions while I sat in the hospital corridor, trying to understand how my husband had gone from complaining about mild stomach pain to being pronounced dead in the space of 2 hours. That evening, as I tucked Quincy into bed, he pulled something from under his pillow. It was a small glass vial carefully wrapped in tissue paper. "Dad gave this to me last week," he whispered, as if the walls might be listening. "He said it was our secret. He said if anything happened to him, I should keep this safe and give it to you or the police. He said Grandma's tea was making him sick, but she kept saying it was good for stress." I held the vial up to the light. The liquid inside was pale green with small dark specks floating in it. My heart began racing as the implications crashed over me. "Quincy, did Dad say anything else?" "He said Grandma called you a failure. He said she wanted him to divorce you and move to Nashville to work at the university hospital. But Dad said he loved our life here. He said you were the best thing that ever happened to him, and he would never leave us. Then he started recording her visits on his phone. He showed me where he hid the phone in his desk drawer at the clinic under the prescription pads. The morning of the funeral arrived gray and oppressive, with storm clouds gathering like an omen over our small Tennessee town. I stood in my bedroom, staring at the black dress I'd never wanted to own, when I heard Vera's voice downstairs. She'd let herself in with the spare key I'd forgotten she had, her heels clicking against our hardwood floors with military precision. "Bethany, where are the photo displays?" she called up, not bothering with a greeting. "I specifically told Chester to inform you I'd be arranging Roland's childhood photos. People should see the accomplished young man he was before everything went sideways." I descended the stairs slowly, finding her in my living room with 2 boxes of photographs and a stern-faced woman I didn't recognize. Vera wore an expensive black suit that probably cost more than our monthly mortgage, her pearl necklace gleaming against the severe fabric. "This is Mrs. Whitmore from the Nashville Tribune," Vera announced. "She's writing an obituary about Roland's potential contribution to veterinary science. Had he pursued the university position instead of staying in this backwater town." "Roland loved this town," I said, my voice steadier than my hands. "He chose to stay here because this was where he wanted to build our life." Vera's laugh was sharp and bitter. Chose? Or was manipulated into staying by a wife who couldn't succeed anywhere else? "That promotion you lost last spring broke his heart, Bethany. He told me he felt like he was carrying the whole family's reputation on his shoulders." "That's not true," Quincy's voice rang out from behind me. He stood on the staircase, already dressed in his funeral suit, his small fists clenched. "Dad said Mom was the best librarian in the state. He said Mr. Holbrook only gave the promotion to his nephew because of nepotism. Dad even wrote a letter to the library board about it." Vera's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Children should be seen, not heard, Quincy. Your father clearly forgot to teach you proper manners, among other failures in this household." "Don't speak to my son that way," I said, moving between them. "Your son?" Vera stepped closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper that Mrs. Whitmore strained to hear. "The son who will now grow up without a father because you couldn't provide the life Roland deserved? The stress of being married to someone who couldn't even advance in a small-town library killed him. Everyone knows it. The relatives have been talking about it all week." That's when I noticed Quincy pulling something from his pocket, the small glass vial catching the morning light. My heart jumped, but before I could stop him, he held it up. "What's that, sweetheart?" I asked, though I already knew. "Dad gave it to me last week," he said, his voice clear and brave. "He said if anything happened to him, I should keep this safe. He said Grandma's tea made him feel sick, but she kept saying it was good for stress. He saved some of it in this vial." The room went silent. Even Mrs. Whitmore stopped scribbling in her notebook. Vera's face cycled through emotions. Surprise, anger, then a calculated coldness that made my blood chill. "What an imagination this child has," she said, forcing a laugh. "Roland always said the boy was too sensitive, making up stories to deal with his grief, I suppose." Daphne chose that moment to enter from the kitchen, having heard everything. "Making up stories? Then I suppose Roland made up these voice recordings too?" She held up Roland's phone, which we'd retrieved from his clinic desk the night before. Vera's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. "What recordings?" 6 months' worth, Daphne said, her lawyer voice in full effect, including one from last Sunday where Roland says, and I quote, "Mother brought her special blend again. She watched me drink every drop, stomach cramping within an hour. She mentioned Bethany's failure at work 4 times during the visit. Said I deserved better. I'm scared of what she might do." Chester appeared in the doorway, having arrived for the funeral. His face paled as he took in the scene. "Vera, what are they talking about?" "They're trying to create drama on the day we bury our son," Vera snapped. "This is what Roland had to deal with, Chester. A paranoid wife, a sister-in-law trying to make trouble, and a child being raised with no respect for his elders." "No," Chester said slowly, his voice gaining strength. "I want to know about this tea. You told me it was an herbal blend for stress. You said it would help Roland think clearly about his future." "It was medicinal," Vera's voice rose sharply. Ancient herbs to clarify the mind and strengthen resolve. Roland needed to see that he was wasting his potential here. Every Sunday I tried to help him, understand that he could do so much better than this life, this wife, this mediocre existence she'd trapped him in. The church was packed beyond capacity, with people standing along the walls and spilling into the vestibule. Roland had touched so many lives in our community that it seemed the entire town had come to say goodbye. I sat in the front pew with Quincy pressed against my side, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes on us. Vera had positioned herself at the end of our pew, ensuring she'd be visible to everyone, her black veil arranged dramatically around her face. Pastor Tillman began the service with Roland's favorite hymn, but I could barely hear it over the buzzing in my ears. My mind kept replaying the morning's confrontation, the vial in Quincy's pocket feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Daphne sat on my other side, Roland's phone secure in her purse, the evidence we'd discovered eating at me like acid. Vera rose to deliver the eulogy she'd insisted on giving. She walked to the podium with practiced grace, removing her veil with a theatrical gesture that drew murmurs of sympathy from the congregation. "My son Roland was destined for greatness," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the church. From childhood, he showed exceptional promise. He could have led research teams at veterinary universities, could have made breakthrough discoveries that saved thousands of animals. He had offers from prestigious institutions that begged for his expertise. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the crowd before landing on me. But Roland was too loyal for his own good. He chose to stay in this small town to limit his potential because he believed in commitment, even when that commitment became a chain around his ankle. The stress of watching opportunities pass by, of carrying the financial and social burden of a household where he was the only one achieving anything significant, wore him down day by day. Quincy's hand found mine, squeezing tight. I could feel him trembling with anger. This brave little boy who'd watched his father deteriorate for months while keeping terrible secrets. "Some people," Vera continued, "aren't meant for the pressure of being married to exceptional individuals. When my daughter-in-law lost her promotion last spring, a position that would have finally given Roland something to be proud of in his wife's career, I watched my son age 10 years in a month. The embarrassment, the disappointment, the realization that he would always be held back, it was killing him slowly. That's when I felt Quincy tug urgently at my sleeve. "Mom," he whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. "Listen." He pulled out his father's phone, which Daphne had given him to hold, and showed me the screen. There was a recording dated just 2 days before Roland died, one we hadn't listened to yet. Quincy had found it while Vera spoke, unable to sit still under her lies. I held the phone to my ear, volume low, and heard Roland's voice, weak but clear. "If something happens to me, please know Bethany is the love of my life. Mom has been poisoning me. I have proof. The tea contains oleander extract. I found the plants in her greenhouse, researched the symptoms. They match everything I've experienced. I've been documenting everything. I love you, Beth. I love you, Quincy. I'm so sorry I couldn't stop her sooner." The decision crystallized in that moment. I could let Roland be buried with Vera's narrative hanging over his memory, branded as a man destroyed by his wife's mediocrity, or I could honor his courage in documenting the truth. I stood up in the middle of Vera's speech, my movement causing a ripple of gasps through the congregation. "Excuse me," I said, my voice carrying clear and strong. "I have something that needs to be shared." Vera's face flushed with anger. "Sit down, Bethany. This is neither the time nor place for your dramatics." "You're right," I said, walking toward the podium. "The time was 6 months ago when you started bringing Roland your special tea. The place was your greenhouse where you grew the oleander plants you used to make it." The church erupted in shocked murmurs. Pastor Tillman stood from his chair, uncertainty written across his face. Chester had gone completely white, gripping the pew in front of him. "These are the delusions of a grieving widow," Vera announced to the crowd. "She can't accept that her husband died from the stress she caused." I held up Roland's phone. "Roland left us recordings, Vera. 6 months of evidence. He documented every visit, every cup of tea, every symptom. He photographed the oleander plants in your greenhouse. He saved samples of the tea. He did it all to protect us, because he knew no one would believe him without proof. Quincy stood up beside me, pulling out the vial. "My dad was brave," he said, his young voice echoing in the stunned silence. He knew Grandma was making him sick, but he kept collecting evidence. He told me the truth because he wanted someone to know, someone who could speak up if he couldn't. The walk from the church to the cemetery felt like a funeral procession through thick molasses. The storm that had threatened all morning finally broke as we gathered around Roland's grave, rain falling in heavy sheets that turned the ground to mud within minutes. The pallbearers struggled to position the coffin over the grave, their polished shoes slipping on the wet grass. I stood with Quincy under a black umbrella that Daphne held over us, though the wind kept blowing rain sideways into our faces. Pastor Tillman opened his Bible, water immediately spotting the delicate pages. "We gather here to commit Roland's body to the earth," he began, raising his voice above the rain. "Earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, in sure and certain hope of the resurrection to eternal life." That's when Vera's voice cut through the prayer like a scream in a library. It died because he couldn't handle her failure. She stepped forward from under Chester's umbrella, rain immediately plastering her black dress to her frame. "My brilliant son, reduced to nothing because his wife couldn't even manage to get promoted in a small-town library. The shame of it killed him. Everyone here knows it but won't say it. Roland deserved better than a mediocre wife who dragged him down to her level." The relatives gasped in unison. Mrs. Patterson dropped her prayer book into the mud. Dr. Morrison, who'd signed Roland's death certificate, pushed forward through the crowd. Chester reached for Vera's arm, but she yanked away from him, her eyes wild with grief and rage. 13 years I watched my son diminish himself for her," Vera continued, pointing at me with a shaking finger. 13 years of watching him pretend that running a small-town clinic was enough when he could have been heading research departments at universities. She trapped him with her small dreams and her failures. When she lost that pathetic promotion, Roland knew he'd wasted his life. The stress ate him alive from the inside. That's when Quincy broke free from my grip. My 8-year-old son ran through the rain and grabbed his father's coffin with both hands, his small body shaking with emotion. "Grandma, should I tell everyone what you made Dad drink?" His voice rang out clear and strong across the cemetery, cutting through the sound of rain on umbrellas. "Should I show them what's in my pocket?" Pastor Tillman's Bible slipped from his hands and hit the mud with a wet thud that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. 30 relatives stood frozen, rain running down their faces like tears. Even the wind seemed to pause, holding its breath for what would come next. Quincy turned to face the crowd, pulling the glass vial from his pocket. The pale green liquid inside seemed to glow in the storm's dim light. "Dad saved this from the tea Grandma brought him every Sunday. He said it was evidence. He said she was poisoning him because she wanted him to leave Mom and me." "You lying child!" Vera shrieked, starting toward him, but Daphne stepped between them, her lawyer instincts taking over. "Don't touch him, Vera," Daphne warned. "There are 30 witnesses here." Chester stumbled backward, his face a mask of horror and dawning realization. "Vera, what is the boy talking about? What was in that tea you made for Roland?" "It was medicinal," Vera screamed, her carefully maintained composure finally shattering completely. Herbs to clear his mind, to give him strength to see the truth about his situation. He needed clarity to understand that he was wasting his life with her. I pulled out Roland's phone, my hand steady despite the earthquake in my chest. "Roland recorded everything, Vera. Every Sunday visit for 6 months, every cup of tea you watched him drink, every time you told him I was a burden he needed to shed." I pressed play on the most damning recording, Roland's weak voice carrying across the cemetery through the phone's speaker. "May 15th, Mom brought her special blend again. She stood over me until I drank it all. Stomach cramping started within an hour. She spent the whole visit talking about Beth's promotion loss, saying I deserved better, that I needed to be freed from my burden. I found Oleander in her greenhouse yesterday. I took pictures. The symptoms match everything I've been experiencing. I think my mother is trying to kill me." The crowd erupted. Someone was already calling 911. Dr. Morrison pushed through to us, his face grave. Oleander poisoning would explain the symptoms Roland presented: the cardiac arrest, the gastrointestinal distress he'd mentioned in recent months. My God, why didn't I see it? Because you trusted that a mother would never hurt her son, I said, rain mixing with tears on my face. Vera stood in the downpour, her black veil torn away by the wind, her face a twisted mask of rage and madness. I was saving him. He was meant for greatness, not this pathetic life. The tea was supposed to make him sick enough to take time off, to get away from her influence, to remember who he really was. You killed him, Chester said, his voice broken. You killed our son because he was happy with his life, and you couldn't stand it. The sirens were already approaching, their wails cutting through the storm. The autopsy results came back 3 weeks after the funeral, confirming what Roland had discovered on his own. The oleander extract in Vera's medicinal tea had been slowly destroying his heart and digestive system for 6 months. The toxicologist explained that the doses were calculated to cause gradual deterioration, not immediate death, which made it even more sinister. Vera had wanted Roland to suffer, to become weak enough that she could manipulate him into leaving us. She was arrested the same day the results came in, charged with first-degree murder. The trial revealed the full extent of her planning. She'd researched oleander poisoning extensively, had grown the plant specifically for this purpose, and had even kept a journal documenting Roland's declining health with satisfaction. One entry read, "He's finally starting to see how his life could be different. The weakness is making him vulnerable to truth." Chester filed for divorce from his jail cell visiting room, his voice hollow as he told me, "I knew she was controlling, but I never imagined she was capable of this. I failed Roland by not protecting him from his own mother." He testified against her at trial, revealing years of psychological manipulation he'd been too weak to confront. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Quincy had to testify. My brave 8-year-old son sitting in that witness chair with Roland's stethoscope in his lap for courage. He told the jury about the Sunday visits, about his father's increasing illness, about the recordings Roland had made him promise to protect. When the prosecutor asked why his father had confided in him, Quincy's answer broke everyone in the courtroom. Dad said sometimes kids see truth better than adults because we haven't learned to explain evil away yet. Vera was sentenced to 25 years for first-degree murder. As they led her away, she was still insisting she'd been trying to save Roland from mediocrity. She showed no remorse, only rage that her plan had failed. She still writes letters from prison that we return unopened, though Chester tells me they're full of accusations and justifications. 3 months after the trial, Quincy and I held a proper memorial for Roland at his clinic. The whole town came, bringing their pets to honor the veterinarian who'd treated every animal with compassion. We established the Roland Mitchell Memorial Fund, which provides free veterinary care for families who can't afford it. The fund raised $50,000 in its first month alone, proof of how deeply Roland had touched our community. I did eventually get promoted at the library, but not because of pity. The library board investigated the nepotism in the previous decision and found multiple violations of hiring policies. Mr. Holbrook was removed from the board, and I was offered the position of head librarian based on merit. At my acceptance speech, I said, "My husband always knew I deserved this position. He never once saw my career as less important than his own. We were partners, equal in every way that mattered." Quincy started therapy to process the trauma of keeping such dark secrets and losing his father. His therapist told me he showed remarkable resilience, crediting the strong foundation Roland had given him. On Roland's birthday, Quincy asked if we could visit his grave. He brought the stethoscope and placed it on the headstone, saying, "I wanted Dad to know my heart is still strong, just like he taught me." Chester became a different man after Vera's conviction. He sold their house, moved to a small apartment near us, and became the grandfather Quincy had never really had before. He volunteers at the animal clinic now, finding redemption in continuing Roland's work. "I can't bring him back," he told me one day, "but I can try to honor the man he became despite us, not because of us." The greatest revelation came when we found Roland's final project at the clinic. He'd been writing a book about veterinary care in rural communities, dedicated to Bethany, who shows me every day that success isn't measured in titles or prestige, but in the lives we touch and the love we share. The book was published posthumously and became a resource for veterinary students interested in community practice. 1 year later, as Quincy and I planted a garden in Roland's memory, my son asked, "Do you think Dad knew we'd be okay?" "Yes," I told him, kneeling beside him in the dirt. "Your father made sure we had everything we needed, the truth, evidence, and each other. He protected us even when he was dying." That's what real love does. It protects, it persists, and it tells the truth even when that truth is terrifying. The vial Quincy carried that day at the cemetery now sits in a police evidence archive, but its real power was in what it represented: a father's determination to protect his family, a son's courage to speak truth, and the ultimate failure of hatred disguised as love. Roland was right in his final recording. Life isn't about reaching the highest peak. It's about who stands beside you while you climb. Vera never understood that, and it cost her everything: her son, her freedom, and any chance at redemption. If you found this story compelling, please take a moment to like this video and share it with others who might need to hear it. Your comments mean everything to us as we share these powerful, true stories of courage, survival, and justice. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us of the strength found in truth and the power of speaking up, even when our voices shake. Thank you for listening to Roland's story, told through the eyes of those who loved him most.